So thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Cam McMurchie. I'm from Tencent, and we have an excellent panel today to talk about a very important subject. We will save a few minutes at the end, so if you have some questions, hang on to them, and I promise to set aside a little bit of time towards the end where we can address those. So we are in a race to reduce carbon emissions and meet the net zero goals of the UN's Paris Agreement. Now, we're just a couple of weeks away from the opening of COP28, which promises a global stock take, the first report card on the Paris Agreement, which will hopefully tell us where we are and what we still urgently need to do. The UN notes that two key parts of achieving the Paris goals are finance and technology under a broader umbrella of partnerships. And we have all of those perspectives represented on this panel today. So what we want to be able to answer is how can technology accelerate our net zero goals, and what do we need to do to speed things up? So I want to introduce the panel. Their names are on the screen behind us. But to my left is Woojin Han. He's a senior climate specialist at the UN Climate Center and Network. Dr. Nicholas Hawker, co-founder and CEO of First Light Fusion. Marc Sabas, investment director at Ship2B Ventures. And my colleague, Dr. Hao Xu, who's the vice president of Sustainable Social Value at Tencent. So I'm going to get started just by asking a question to each of them just to kick things off. So I'll start Woojin, with you. Where are we at right now in terms of the Paris climate goals, and how is technology being used, or how is it helping us get there?
I work for Climate Center and Network. Climate Technology Center and Network. It's under the UN FCCC, which is a UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is entered into force in 1994. It's a global membership by about 200 countries for now. And by the Paris Agreement, we are promised to limit the increase of the global average temperature up to 1.5 degrees Celsius comparing to the pre-industrial phases. And we, as a CTCN, we are trying to transfer the technologies from developed countries to developing countries upon their request, which meaning if they want to make a policy, we can match the organizations who can make the policy for the developing countries. Also, we are helping the countries to piloting or demonstrating the high technology by funding up to $250,000 per project. So that's how we are our contribution.
For sure, and I want to come back to the developing country stuff a little bit later. Nicholas, you're at First Light Fusion, which is doing some very interesting things. Can you talk a bit just about what is happening there and what the plans are sort of long term?
So yeah, I'm Nick from First Light Fusion. We're a spin out from University of Oxford. We're developing a new approach to a particular type of fusion. There's two main approaches, and what we do is called inertial fusion. And there was huge news in the field. Maybe you saw, I don't know, it's very big news in the field. In December last year, energy gain being demonstrated by inertial fusion for the first time. It's the only approach which has crossed that level. So there's a facility in the US called the National Ignition Facility, and they got more energy in the out than they put in for the first time. What we do is exactly the same physics. There's no additional physics risk in the approach that we take. But there's a different wrapper around the outside, which makes the same kind of conditions in the fuel happen, but in a much simpler, much lower cost, and much easier to engineer system. So that's kind of the point of what we do. One more piece in my little pitch for First Light. We also have like foundational technology for inertial fusion. So we have a full end-to-end simulation, machine learning, optimization capability for the key piece of inertial fusion. We're the only company in the world that has that. The National Ignition Facility is actually it's a nuclear weapons facility, right? So those codes and simulation tools are classified, and they're not coming out of the lab. So what does fusion actually mean? Fusion is a clean baseload source of electricity, and everyone always sort of draws the comparison to nuclear to explain it, which I kind of don't like doing because it implicitly says that is down on nuclear, saying nuclear is bad. But I am a huge supporter of nuclear, and so the way I would kind of try and put it is for next generation nuclear and for fission, there's requirements you have to meet, safety requirements and so on. And with the best nuclear designs, you can meet those requirements. Getting to that same level of safety with fusion is easy in comparison because it's just a fundamentally different process. It's not possible to have a meltdown. It's not a chain reaction. You work really, really hard to get this thing to work. Any disruption and it stops immediately. So it does everything that nuclear can do in the energy mix, but without some of the big drawbacks.
And how far away are we from?
Well, we're working towards early to mid 2030s for the first pilot plant. It's important to be realistic, right? That's a pilot plant, and it won't be very good, right? Because things are hard and they take time. But I really think that we will see a first few pilot plants. I think we'll have more than one successful technology. I think we'll see a first few pilot plants in 2030s, and I think there will be a big push for fusion in the 2040s. This isn't going to save us for climate change, right? We need to do stuff now, today, for getting to net zero, but it can contribute.
Things are hard. Marc, so your firm focuses on investing, right, in impact startups. From your perspective, I mean, what are you seeing in Europe? Where are things at?
Yeah, so I think across Europe, it's the climate or the again, impact, we define it as trying to solve the world's biggest challenges, and we define this as investing in climate change, quality of life for health in the health space, and then education. I focus on climate. So in the climate investing arena, I think the sector overall across Europe is very, very healthy. There's a lot of great entrepreneurs doing amazing things. And maybe to talk about two specific things that we're seeing in the market is one, which comes more as a reflection of the need for new technology, but that is not the only thing that we need. So we believe that we also need a change of the way we actually do things. So for things like what Nick is working on, super important, and to keep on investing in this and exploring it so that in the long term we have other more sustainable ways of sourcing energy. But we also need to be thinking about how we're consuming energy and how we're using this energy, and basically how our lifestyles and our industries have been adopted to this. So we need to change that. And that not always is technology. And then the second point is around that the money, actually, when we think about climate, really you're talking about investing in everything. It's just a different lens or a perspective on looking at industries, looking at agriculture, looking at transportation, mobility, built environment, energy generation. So this means that when we see the money being invested in climate, you kind of need to double click and understand where is the money going to. I invest in the early stage, and in the VC world, there's been a lot of money until now that has gone mainly to energy generation and think about renewables, and then mobility and transportation. Really think about mobility, really think about micromobility, right? And so massively over-indexed areas, but there's other things that are left behind, which is a built environment, as I've mentioned, agriculture, as I've mentioned, industrials, and these are areas that we can go more into the specifics, but the VC model, as we had understood it now, doesn't really fit perfectly in the kind of challenges that these technologies are faced. Most of them are, hard to scale. They require money. They require time. They require capex. And this involves a new way of approaching investment. So let's make sure that we, not all money goes to climate, but actually goes to go funding each of the verticals that is needed.
What are some of the solutions that you see sort of in this area that would make this a little bit smoother?
The importance of understanding or having a systemic lens on how you approach problems, that really helps. So not only focusing on a particular technology development, which is really important, but as well to have a view of what exactly are you trying to change across all of this system, and what's going to be the repercussions beyond an immediate solution. No? That's one. Another challenge that we have as an industry, which we're trying to fight very hard for, is gender diversity. We do not see enough gender diversity across the space. Luckily, I think, or fortunately, in the impact world, this is actually much better than overall the VC world. Our firm, for example, we have over 40 companies invested. More than 50% of them are led by female CEOs. This is highly unusual because we're not a gender lens fund, but we always look for the best companies. And the third one is around understanding and bringing patient patient capital, and not only being expected to kind of like, put $1 million, get out $1 billion as an early stage investor, but partnering with the right people, people who have knowledge on the space, corporations, governments, which all together we can bring a better solution to the climate challenges, for example.
Great. Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to come back to in a bit, but I want to get over to Dr. Hao Xu, who I obviously know quite well from Tencent. So, I mean, Tencent has been doing a lot in this space, especially over the last couple of years. So I just kind of want to give you the floor a little bit to talk about sort of where we are at as well.
Thanks. Yeah, really happy to be here. So my name is Hao Xu. I actually represent one of the newest business units in Tencent called SSV, Sustainable Social Value. It's basically one of our business unit focusing on how do we develop new models to push the sustainable development agenda across almost all the SDG goals, and climate change is one of the most important ones. The reason we set up such a business unit is we think ultimately any of the sustainable development topics will have to generate new business model and to have to generate value so we can solve it. And climate is probably one of the most apparent example. Is only if we can have new business model that we can solve the climate crisis, because transitioning to a carbon neutral world will really need economic and industrial structural transformation. So the sheer volume can only be done by new business models. So and we focus a lot on emerging climate tech because many of the tech are not mature yet. So in terms of what we do, so we sort of do two areas of things on the climate tech space. On the one side, we want to leverage our own capabilities in terms of linking the consumers, reduce improve the efficiency of data and the information transferring. So we launched actually what we call Tan Life platform in China last year. So the idea is actually very simple, is to how do we more efficiently link demand with supply, with investors, with startup projects, potential users of new technology, and potential providers of a new technology. And we see reasonable success and quite high level of activity beyond what we expected. So this year, we just launched the Tan Life global version. In the COP28, we will work in collaboration with the COP presidency and many of the partners we have to try to turn in the same model globally to accelerate the low carbon transition. So that's one area we're working on. On the other side, we also want to working on sort of the hard technology development. So one example is we launched what we call a Carbon X program earlier this year, also initially in China, focusing on CCUS technologies. We really want to focus on emerging ones that probably don't have a good business model. The cost may be too high. The technology may not be very mature. But if we look at a carbon neutral world, it will probably have to be there. And we think CCUS is one of the technology group that is potentially very important. So we launched the program in March, and we actually received much more than what we expected projects. So we selected top 30 projects, and we're working together with them how to help them to grow a bit bigger or a bit stronger. So I guess one unique approach what we take is actually the topics we discussed today. So we don't really focusing purely on technology innovation. We're not only focusing on to have a better business model, we're also not focusing on bringing a better market environment in terms of standard database or policies, but we are working everything together. So how can we, our hypothesis is if we pushing the technology innovation, pushing the new business model, and pushing a better market environment development, we can actually accelerate the technology development and adaptation and scale up in such like CCUS. So we think we have a pretty successful run, and then in the future we will focusing on launching probably a second round or a continuous round, focusing on different family of low carbon technologies, and we really also want to work globally with all the innovators and all the stakeholders in this space. And we've done that in China purely focusing on Tanlife. So now we are also want to open the Tanlife place to the global stakeholders. So anyone who want to run similar programs can use Tanlife for free, and we committed to that, and we will commit to continuously improve the functionality and the capability of Tanlife, so that not only we can put our own resources into such a platform or ecosystem, and other programs can also thrive on the platform. So our hypothesis is only if we can do that, then we can really push the agenda forward and accelerate the pace to the low carbon transition. So we can really achieve the climate goal that we ought to achieve.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Tanlife is a good example of what a large sort of technology or internet company can do. But I want to get into some of the policy side here as well. I mean, I guess I can start with Woojin, but it's open to the whole panel. But I mean, what is lacking, I guess, on the policy side? And is there a jurisdiction out there that is doing things right that other countries might be able to learn from?
Yeah, before I joined the UN system, I used to work for the Korean government for like 15 years. And I think the predictability is the most important value that government can support for the technology, because it's very natural for the private sectors to seeking for their profit, but there is also a pressure from the outside that they need to contribute to social activities like SDGs or carbon neutrality. So these activities should be continue within their expectation. But if not, they are not sustainable. So what makes it sustainable is by legislation or the government long-term policy. So if not, it's very vulnerable to the internal and external shocks. The other thing is that creating an ecosystem for the government is really important to create an ecosystem for the private sector or government-funded organization transfer the technology to each other or to the other countries, so they can get enough fund for the project as well. Also, the other thing is the acceptability. So let me take an example of the hydrogen technology, which is the very emerging technology in terms of the new in the energy sector. Even though there's enough technology developed already, if when it comes to the people, let's say, so the government is trying to install the charging station in your area, so there should be many people who are opposing to that. And also there should be a storage site and a transportation site, which I believe is really safe, but in terms of hydrogen, some people believe that it's not that safe. So for the people who don't want to take the risk of getting those new technology, the government should work on to increase their awareness of the technology or increase the acceptability of the technology.
And what do you think? And again, this is for the panel. I mean, part of this discussion is really looking at how to have cooperation across different stakeholders, from government to VC, to encourage entrepreneurship. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing in your respective areas, or barriers to this that you're seeing? Maybe start with Nick.
Well, I mean, if I can comment if I pick a topic, I'll comment on the regulations for fusion, because this has been the big barrier really for nuclear and cost, is that it's all driven by the regulatory burden. And I'm not going to open the debate about whether that's the right level of burden for fission, right? But both in the UK and in the US, the decision has been made that fusion will not be regulated like fission. So in the UK at least, it won't be the Office for Nuclear Regulation. It'll be a new entity basically, which it's kind of interesting because it clearly sidesteps a big risk, and this comes up in investor conversations. Probably 1/3 of my meetings or something, people ask about what about regulations. But then equally, what we need to see now is proactivity in setting up those teams, and then the right kind of engagement with the fusion industry to make sure those teams, there's going to have to be a lot of learning done, right? About the properties of fusion, what are the risks, what are the hazards, all this sort of stuff. And I think, again, just sort of pointing to the UK, the shining example, which is now given in every one of these conversations, is how the vaccines for COVID were regulated. And to me, the way that looks like that was done was in a very agile manner. And I mean kind of agile with like a capital A, agile. The regulator was in the room in frequent contact with the developer, and they're talking constantly about what needs to be proven, what needs to be shown. And it just becomes iterative on a very quick, rapid time cycle. And this actually is how the Office for Nuclear Regulation is kind of set up. It's not prescriptive. It basically, the simple thing is you start with, I've got this design, and then they say, okay, great, so can you prove to me that it's safe? And it should be very iterative and agile, but it turns into these massive things with like 5,000-page documents and so on. So yeah, there's a huge opportunity with fusion to sort of to regulate it appropriately and to get to the cost level that will then lead to. It needs to be set up in the right way.
I mean, you're talking sort of specifically about the UK, and I think COVID is a great example. I think everyone around the world obviously saw the urgency there, but is it more challenging sort of to push this urgency to get government more involved?
Well, I mean, should we be responding to COVID to climate change with the same level of urgency as COVID?
I think we can all agree.
I'd say yes, although I'm not sure we've thought that through. I mean, like, stop flying for 5 years. I mean, that would be responding in the same way, right? I would actually support that. Yeah, what can I say?
Yeah. I was going to make a point on the regulations and incentive mechanisms. And for me, one of the ones that I think has been or can be very successful and has been successful is pricing-based mechanisms that act as an incentive to develop a whole new industry. So, for example, as Woojin was talking about hydrogen, right? So if we want green hydrogen, for example, one of the best things that a country or a region can do is say, okay, I'll buy the cubic meter of green hydrogen, as long as I can audit it and I know that it is green hydrogen. I'll buy it at this price, and I'll buy you up to this quantity. And so this actually incentivizes a whole industry to say, well, at that price, if I can produce it under this cost, I have a really good business, and in fact I have a stable cash flow out of that business, and that's when somebody goes in and buys the electrolyzers and goes through all the machinery. So pricing-based mechanisms is really interesting. Another example would be, for example, for carbon capture and storage. No, okay, I'll buy the nano carbon tubes of this level of purity by this price, and the market kind of makes itself. So that's a really good way I find that can come even from public institutions. That's a really good use of money because you're just creating the industry from scratch.
Yeah, I think in terms of like climate problem, it probably ultimately relies on what are the nature of the problem and what role should play, right? Different stakeholders should play. Like, for example, on climate change, in terms of policy ought to provide certainty. Right. One example is in China, when China announced the 2030, 2060 carbon neutrality targets, then the whole industry just got mobilized, just probably overnight, because people see certainty that we'll have to get there. And then for business like us, we will probably have to learn how to work on risk and uncertainty, because by definition, innovation means there are high level of risks, and there are many occasions that you will probably fail. But certainty and uncertainty have to go together, right? So when we are working on the CCUS space, for example, is we're actually amazed that in China, at the moment, without a unified carbon price, there are a lot of CCUS companies that are actually making business model, simply because number one, there is a certainty that we have to go carbon neutral. at least by 2060 and hopefully earlier. But on the other side, the nature of the Chinese economy is we have almost 50 plus of all the industrial commodities. So the industrial base is actually there. So we see companies that making calcium carbonate out of CO2. We see companies making methanol or glycol out of CO2, simply because it's probably a rather niche basic chemicals in some of the other economies, but in China is billions of tons of market. So if they can compete on price, on cost with the traditional methods, then they can already survive. So which lead us to be probably more optimistic that what if we have a carbon price in the next few years, right? The government will provide another level of certainty, and all of these startups which began to emerge without a carbon price will probably flourish, right? They will probably scale up faster than we expected. So I think in that sense, as long as we can work by different stakeholders on the who to focus on the providing certainty and who to working on to develop a business out of uncertainty, then we will push the agenda forward.
Can I, just to add to all of these points? I mean, so I think in nuclear and in fission and fusion, it seems like there's a lot of governments trying to pick a technology, which is really fraught with difficulty for lots of reasons. It would be so much simpler and actually probably quite a lot better if they articulated the need and the price that they're willing to pay for it. If the government was to say in 2040 or in the 2040s, we need this amount of clean baseload power and we would pay this price for it. From my point of view, like speaking to investors, that just removes a whole category of risk about whether the market is there and what price and all of that. It creates certainty. And you need consistency from government to kind of have the strength of mind to stick with that.
Yeah, on consistency of government and certainty and that sort of thing. I know there's a lot going on in China that's good. What parts of that do you think, Shuhao, that are sort of transferable to other jurisdictions that might be operating in a different environment?
Yeah, I think in terms of pathways towards low carbon transition, China is probably a good example that all sort of pathways available, right? There are, and China is quite big. There are areas where the renewables and electrification are already becoming a big industry that driving the economic development. There are also areas where they are still based on fossil fuels, either it's coal or other type of fossil fuel that is also huge. So I think China is probably in the next few decades is probably a good pilot ground, seeing how those traditional fossil fuel based places can transit into find their new driver to grow their economy, improve the livelihood of local people while transiting to a more sustainable future. And there are other areas where already probably a bit ahead in terms of climate transition can continue to be mobilized and to expand their role in terms of driving China to a low carbon future. So in that sense, I think a lot of lessons. There will be failures and successes. So I think we really need to learn more from those successes and also those lessons. And many of the lessons probably will help other places around the globe to see how their transitional low carbon transition pathway there is. Like if I can provide one simple example is for example, China have a really robust grid system. So anything that is innovating or competing is based on this assumption that you have a really robust grid system. So in that system, flexibility becomes really important when there are more unflexible renewables on the grid. But it is not necessarily true everywhere globally. Like in other places, probably people can take another approach, right? At the moment, if you have solar panels, if you have cheaper and cheaper battery storage options, and then you can build your energy system in a village or in a small town based on the whole AC system. You don't really need to go to DC. So if you have tens of thousands of those systems and they can be connected together, it's kind of a bottom-up approach to the energy transition. So whether in China, we will probably take the top-down transition pathway, but it doesn't mean that this model fits everybody. So we're also trying to see whether there are different models, and the different models means different opportunities, means different policy and all sorts of support needed. So I think from a China perspective, we really want to see different pathways available in China to take us to a carbon neutral world more efficiently, and hopefully some of these lessons can be shared globally with other places, so that we can go to a carbon neutral world while develop a lot of new business and also be cost effective.
I mean, developing countries also sometimes say they need more support, they need more assistance, that sort of thing. I think a lot of the discussion, I mean, we've got Europe and UK and China represented here, but what are the challenges to try and get more funding, more investment, more support into some developing countries as well? Who would like to take that?
Yeah, let me take it first. I'm from UN. So I think I want to raise two issues regarding the developing countries. The first thing is that not all countries are the same in terms of their readiness to climate action. Because let me take the example of digitalization. The first, everyone knows it takes a lot of energy to digitalize or the digital transformation, or AI, or anything related to digital technologies. So, but for some countries, it's not enough. They are lacking of energy, and also the safety is another issue, because and also the safety and connectivity issues are very critical in terms of digital transportation and transformation. So we are calling that the digital readiness level, which we are making a assessment tool for the digital readiness of each country. So we should focus on whether the developing countries are ready to become digitalized. And the next thing is that we want to focus on the adaptation as well. We all talked about the mitigation issues to reduce the greenhouse gases emissions. But for the countries who are developing, they are suffering from heavy rains or droughts and other things related to the climate actions. So I want all of us to focus on the adaptation as well.
Yes, very good point. I think we have 8 minutes left or so. So I'd like to open it up to the floor, because I know we've got a lot of smart people here who probably got good questions.
I think so ultimately it's probably have to make, from a business perspective, have to make business sense, right? So it's basically when we're developing renewables, when we're developing, for example, EVs or electrification, 10 years ago, probably cost 15 cents US dollars to generate 1 kilowatts of electricity. So at that time, we really need feed-in tariffs to actually balance the ground, to actually promote to it. But today, we only take maybe 1 cent or 1.5 cents to generate 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. So then, at the moment, the problem becomes, given that can the grid actually take as much renewables as possible? If to a certain level, like 40% or 50% renewables, how do we actually build new business model to actually solve the flexibility problem, right? So I think no matter what we do, we have to make business sense. If we make business sense, then the transition, no matter is taking the renewables to the next level or reducing the coal consumption to the current quickly enough to solve the climate crisis, we have to build a business model, right? So at the moment, if, for example, if we take all the coal out of the Chinese grid, which accounts for maybe 65 to 70%, then the question becomes where the electricity comes from. And then the question becomes, can the grid sustain such a transition? At the moment, the answer is no, but we already see technologies, business models that can take us there, right? So in that sense, I think from a business perspective, no matter what you do, you have to build such business model. And then it comes down to who is managing certainty and who is managing uncertainty. And then they have to go head to head to build such a market, right? So I think it doesn't matter it's in China or in other places, we have to do that.
Can I say something about this as well? So, because on the one hand, let's compare and contrast the UK and China, right? On the one hand, the UK has a net zero target by 2050, whereas China is 2060. Okay, so it sounds like the UK is doing great, but the UK climate stuff is subject to political nonsense. So the question is not what the target is. The question is how well are you doing on getting towards that target? Meanwhile, in China, 2022, they added the same amount of solar PV as the entire UK grid, right, in 1 year. And I saw a genuine, like, serious analysis from Carbon Brief a couple of days ago, asking the question: how will China's emissions have peaked in 22, 23, 24? And maybe. I mean, China is doing a lot on climate.
Yeah, so if probably just add a little bit to that is, I think in terms of setting target and how to achieve target, that target is actually different things. Setting target is a top-down process. Achieving a target really take everybody to act. And in China or everywhere in the globe, it's always a matter of how much you put in reduction efforts. As a result, you probably need to put less effort in the adaptation effort, right? So one example is we actually supported adaptation project focusing on how do we prevent the glaciers on the mountains to melt down completely, right? Then you also have to build a business model, right? On one side is how much does it cost to use new technologies to prevent glacier from melting, because it's melting faster and faster at the moment. And then on the other side is what is the existing solution? Existing solution is probably you have to build a lot of reservoirs so that in the spring when all the glacier melts, you will have a flood, right? And after the glacier melt away, you will have less water than expected, right? So in that sense, if we can develop technology that costs less to build those reservoirs, then the technology will flourish. So I think in that sense, setting, as long as we have new business models and technology enough to push the agenda faster, then they will have a more ambitious target. And then even if we don't have more ambitious target, the target will be achieved.
Yeah, my quick reaction would be you need a lot of space. And then you need a business of what to do with all of that algae. Now, for example, biofuel would be one, and the thing is, so I think it's a viable way of capturing CO2. Just like I was saying, I think there's pricing mechanisms that can be used to create nanotubes and use that as a building material, for example. So there's very different things, but you need to think about the scale of the magnitude of the problem and how much you're able to capture with something that is, for example, algae. And creating algae it requires quite a vast space for it to flourish, and you need to get it out, and you need to dehydrate it, and you need to sell it to somebody for all of that to actually make sense. If there was somebody maybe putting a price on CO2 captured via algae, maybe there's more businesses that would focus on that, but there would be very big, extensive businesses.
And just to add to that, my understanding of, because you could be doing carbon capture and storage directly at a plant producing electricity. In the recent years, it seems like that has disappeared from the discussion of clean baseload electricity supply. And my understanding is because of cost, basically, and looking at the cost that would lead to, which again, my understanding is it's been like $150 per megawatt hour for that sort of system at scale. And that's as unproven as fusion for lots of different ways, different risks, but it is. Whereas conventional nuclear is something like $100 per megawatt hour, or if it's South Korea or China building it, maybe it's $60 to $80 per megawatt hour. So it's just a lot lower cost.
Maybe I wanted to just finish with a thought, which is that is a way of trying to continue doing the same things that we're doing, just bigger and more, right? For more people, for more of humanity, for more of for growth, for consumption. And I think there, as a society, we need to do a deep dive into and reflect around the way that, for example, we consume, that we need things, because there's many things, for example, that maybe we don't need to consume them in the same way, we don't need to produce them in the same way, and we can have a much more, we can foster a much more collaborative approach, a much more community-based approach on many of the things which would do us good, and at the same time would reduce, would decarbonize. So
that is an excellent way to wrap up the discussion. I wish we had more time. I do. Unfortunately, we've got a hard out. So I want to thank all of our panelists today. And thank you so much for coming and for the questions, and have a great Web Summit.